You're about to view an episode of Sites on EdTech, Zanichelli Venture's interview series with people from the education technologies world. I'm your host, Luigi Morino, and in this episode I interviewed Curtis Barnes and Michael Feldstein, co-founders and respectively CEO and CIO of Argos Education. In this episode, we spoke about how Argos is reimagining textbooks and courseware in an easy-to-adapt fashion for educators, and the marketplace they are building to empower this vision. Here's the interview. I'm very happy to be speaking to Curtis and Michael today. Thank you for joining us.
Great to be here, Luigi.
Could you please explain to us what Argos Education is?
Absolutely. Argos is an end-to-end learning experience platform that's actually powered by a multi-sided marketplace. So what this means is that using Argos, educators, learning designers, institutions, companies can create from whole cloth or modify existing courses. They can share them, they can sell them, and then they can deliver them. So they have control over that whole kind of create and delivery experience. And then these courses are well instrumented for data. So on the other side, they can analyze them. They can analyze them for learner efficacy. They can analyze them for content efficacy and other kinds of performance measures. And so we think of this as a kind of unified learning experience that replaces textbooks in the more traditional sense. And that the marketplace is a fundamentally important part of our model because it supports the idea of collaborative and kind of crowdsourced creation across the market space. We can get into some of the reasons why that's important later.
Yeah. First of all, you mentioned existing courses. What does that mean? What are the existing courses?
So we have three partners rather, that we're launching with: Carnegie Mellon University, Arizona State University, and Rice University's OpenStax. And each of these in their own right is essentially a publisher. What's unique about these organizations as publishers is their courses can be modified. Their IP model, lets the course be modified by the delivery educator in ways that more traditional publisher-based products cannot be.
What is the extent of the possible modification compared to, there's a couple of publisher courseware out there that do allow some level of modification, although I will admit it is limited. What is the level of modification that Argos can offer and the library of Argos products, or well, the partner products?
Yeah, so ultimately what we envision is having a range of IP models from, what you might think of as very open to derivative modified work, the CC BY 4.0, Creative Commons license that basically allows anyone, as long as they're making the right attributions, to do anything you want. On the other end, would be more traditional publisher rigid IP approach. We see a continuum of both IP models and interest levels in terms of the designer, creator, author population. So, it's very much in where we think it's important that this goes, is that it's in the mind of the person that's actually doing the delivery. Ultimately, what we're going after is how do you personalize learning at scale, right? And that is best done by the educator who's actually delivering the class.
We actually think there's an interesting space in the middle where traditional publishers who don't necessarily want to open up their product for everyone to edit and share with everyone else, to allow their customers to make their changes for their students, and to have those changes be shareable back to the publisher. So very often, if you're using a text in your class, you might skip chapter 7, or you might skip parts of chapter 7, or you might wish you could add or change a part of chapter 7. As a publisher, that's all invisible to you if your customers are actually working around your product. So we think that there's a lot of value in allowing publishers, even ones who want to retain relatively strong IP control, to acknowledge this reality and partner with their customers to learn where their products are weak and where they can be strengthened.
I suppose they can also finally receive much more data on every single exercise and how each and every single exercise has performed for the students, or not just how the students have performed on the exercise or on the specific content, but how the content itself has performed for the students, and therefore decide where to put their hands if they want to change it.
Well, that's exactly right. And it's really important to emphasize that our platform is built on 20-year heritage of Carnegie Mellon's research into exactly that question. They were interested in how individual students can do better, but they were also interested in how well their products, their content was designed to help students do better. And so there's a whole class of analytics built into the product and a whole data infrastructure underneath that most of these products in this space don't have, that enable publishers to understand how their products are performing in actually educating students and how they can improve them, and as you say, where they would be best suited to put more energy into improving their products.
How can this important feature in technological progress that is enabled by a platform such as Argos's platform that you're describing, how can it be safeguarded from the moment that you're enabling lecturers, professors to modify the course to a very great extent, by which then perhaps the original publisher's product is almost well, recognizable. You might be able to recognize the bits and pieces, but then it's kind of hard to basically have a control trial on how the original product was, if it's been modified to a great extent. Do you think that might be problematic?
Well, it's a great question, and there are actually several components to what you just raised. In terms of, the publishers feeling in control of their own brand, they do have ability, and this is something on our roadmap to continue to enhance, but they do have ability to decide what they're going to let their customers modify and what they're not going to let their customers modify. But in terms of experimentation, you're right. Allowing educators to go out and modify it, it gives you data, right? So it tells you, number one, where instructors are dissatisfied, right? And that's separate from a whole set of data around everybody who is using the unmodified set of questions that you've provided, right? And you might choose to lock them down for this particular reason. You can then tell across all the students how well the content is performing, right? We also received a 2-year $850,000 grant from Schmidt Futures to build a complete end-to-end experimental design and execution capability in the platform. So, for example, you can run controlled A/B testing in the platform. We're not there yet. We're still in the design phase, but by next year, we will have implemented this capability where you can, within a particular class or course or cross classes, you can try different educational interventions and see how they work. Now, there's a complexity again between controlling the experiment and allowing educators freedom to modify. So those are interactions that you have the ability to control for.
Sure. But you raise a great point that instructors' modifications are a data point themselves. They are so they do provide you with information. Of course, probably more up to interpretation than some kind of student platform interaction data, but still it is data.
Luigi, just sorry to interrupt, it's data that we're losing today. We have no visibility into it, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, definitely.
Thus, it's really important that we capture that. And there's a technical part of this answer too, which is the platform is instrumented for traceability from the original course through all of its derivatives. So, it's kind of built into the entire model. That's an important part of the design.
Yeah. And I think this is a super important feature that is sometimes lacking in university courses and how university courses are built. So yes, definitely. I wanted to ask you, where does the actual modification of courses on behalf of instructors happen? Is it on Argos's platform, or is a course that is purchased through Argos then brought onto an LMS, and does the modification happen onto an LMS? Where does it happen?
You want to take it, Michael?
Yeah, so there's an established pattern for this product category, courseware, right, which we'll talk more about later, I know. But basically, the courseware is integrated into the LMS using a technical standard called LTI, and a particular version of LTI called number 1.3, and that's it's important to know the version, because 1.3 allows us to return grades and scores from the platform to the LMS. So with that capability, you can place lessons from Argos into the LMS, and you can get grades. Students can get their grades reported to the LMS gradebook. Now, the modifications that happen, some of them actually can happen from the LMS through LTI, if what you've enabled is for educators not to edit the content, but to remix it. So I'll take this lesson and this lesson and this lesson and pull them in from a pool of lessons and put them in. You can do that from the LMS. If you want to actually go in and edit the content, that would be done on the Argos side, but it would show up through the LTI connection.
Okay, so there would be one access point, one login point.
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay, I see. So we spoke about modifications, where do they happen, when we spoke about the Argos platform. Would you like to show us what we're talking about?
Sure. Let me share your screen. I'll give you a quick, I wouldn't even call it a tour. Let's just say a few highlights. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, so Argos enables a range of learning experiences, from the quite sophisticated to very simple and straightforward. And we actually have two separate authoring environments. One for that we call core authoring, that's usable by a wide range of non-technical experts, and is suitable for most purposes. And then we have what we call adaptive authoring, which is what I'm going to start to show you here, because it's, well, frankly, it's sexy. And that is useful for creating really sophisticated scientific simulations and that sort of thing. So what you're looking at here is a screen from a lesson that was created by our friends at ASU InSpark. This is their branding up here. And they took complete control over the screen. And what we have in the middle here actually is something that's produced by Colorado University called PhET. They make these very sophisticated physics simulations. And very often what happens, for example, in an OpenStax text, or will happen often in a course in an LMS, is they'll link out to the simulation that's on the Colorado University website, and the students will play with the simulation, and then they'll come back, and the professor will know nothing about what the students actually did. Well, this particular version of PhET, it's called PhET.io, you actually can get data in and out. And what we've done is we've integrated it into our platform. So this piece here with the building an atom, that's actually third party, that's PhET. So you can add these protons, and it's giving me helpful guidance on the kind of atom I'm building. And so I've got carbon. Okay, I have a carbon atom. Great. So I'm going to hit next as a student and see what happens. And what's happening is that the simulation, which is created by this third party, is interacting with our platform. And the platform is giving very specific feedback based on what we've done. Yeah. We've created an ion, and so this feedback is actually incorrect. This is a carbon ion, so somebody needs to rewrite that text. I'll show you exactly where that happens. So if I am creating one of these sophisticated simulations, I have a complete canvas. Let me expand this. It looks a little scrunched up because on my screen zoomed out so you can read everything clearly. But if this were normal size, everything would fit normally, right? So this is the PhET.io simulation that we've embedded. And here you can see this is essentially a rules engine. And there are three aspects that we're evaluating: the number of protons, the number of electrons, and the number of neutrons, right? And so what we're doing here is looking at the number of protons, the number of electrons, and the number of neutrons, and giving feedback specific to that particular student's answer. And we're also getting the data underneath. The student had a particular answer. In this case, it was a right answer. If they got the electrons incorrect, right? This is the feedback they should have gotten, right? Yeah. And we can create quite a sophisticated canvas here. We can give them video feedback, audio feedback. We can include pictures and so on, right? So we can also use this to do much simpler things, like, for example, create a simple branching where the student has a misconception. Rather than just giving them feedback, we send them out to a little thought experiment to test their assumption. We get them to see that they have a misconception, and we send them back to the main screen.
So this is the modifications that a lecturer can make as well.
Yes, if the publisher has given them permission, the lecturer can come in and make this modification. They can say that feedback was incorrect, or I don't like that feedback. I'm going to make the change here. Mm-hmm. Now, in a lot of cases, your content is a lot less complex. You don't need anything that complex.
I wanted to ask you, sorry for interrupting you, Michael. I wanted to ask you a couple of things on that side. My first question is, why would you want to enable the possibility to modify to such a detailed extent? I mean, the exercise is built that way, and perhaps like the exercise as a package is already kind of fine as it is. And if there is like one mistake on the publisher's side, okay, the publisher can be contacted to make a modification, and that's fine. Is there something I've lost here?
No, look, in a case like this, you might want to lock this down, right?
Okay.
I will add, though, that there are professors who are perfectly capable. You know, if you're a chemistry professor, this is you know, this level of programming, you're perfectly capable of modifying or even creating yourself. But more likely, and this wasn't a screen I had intended to show you, so let me see if I can even find it. Okay, here's a better example of something you might want to let professors modify in this particular authoring environment, right? So here we're giving a lesson on brightness of stars, and this is for an astronomy class. So in this case, I'm going to ask the students, you know, what are the two properties that I see that seem to vary? And you know, I could put down brightness and color, and it will carry those answers across to the next screen. It's not doing anything with it. It's just reminding me what I put in as a student, and then giving me an answer. And then I get to this next screen, right? Lesson objectives. This is typical. Some explanation about brightness, and you know, a little bit of lesson, and then, you know, oops, I didn't give an answer. So let's say what's the intrinsic property of the star? Its luminosity. I happen to know that's the right answer. We're moving along. This is where I wanted to get to, right? So here, I had just described earlier, let's say I have a misconception as a student that objects will appear the same brightness at any distance. And rather than simply saying, yeah, that's not right, why don't you try again? I'm going to challenge you. I'm going to take you on a little loop. And if you imagine that if-then condition we saw before, the condition is if student answers, you know, that the brightness doesn't change, then send them to this page. It's very simple, very, very simple, right? And so now it's asking me, think about it. Look at these lights. You know, do the ones further away look just as bright as the ones closer? Well, no, they don't. Okay, so we've done a plausibility check, and it doesn't seem like your answer makes sense. So let's go back and give you a chance to try that again. Now, this is a kind of loop that you might want to let instructors play with, modify, or even just look in to see how it's constructed so they can model it, because this is a very common sort of feedback construction. We eventually want to templatize this so they don't need to go in and do this and copy it, right? This should be a pattern that instructors use, that they don't even have to go into that advanced adaptive authoring platform to create. But this is a good example of the kind of lesson that an instructor might want to modify.
Sure. This totally makes sense. I also wanted to ask you, with the exercise that you were showing me previously, you mentioned it was developed by Colorado University, and it is inside the courseware that was developed from Arizona State University. Is that correct?
Correct. So simulation was developed by Colorado.
Yeah. Okay. So we're already seeing these solutions in which various courseware is adopting single exercises, single activities from other areas, perhaps even open educational resources, and putting them in the whole package that is then going to be sold on to Argos's marketplace.
Exactly right.
Yeah. Okay, this feeds into a question that is going to come up about the educational ecosystem. Okay, great. Thanks for showing us this. Was there anything, any other part of the platform on the teacher's side or that you were willing to show us?
Yeah, there are a couple of just really quick pieces I want to show. So this is an example of our core authoring page, and this is content that our friends and I at the InSpark network at Arizona State University, they've taken an OpenStax core title and they're modifying it, right? So they can add learning objectives, for example, and they've begun to add them for the course, right? They can add the ones that are selected here. And this is not necessarily instructors. This is for learning designers that are creating a product. Sure. So this is a publisher at work, right? Sure. And you can think about the interesting thing about the platform is it allows you to blur that line or just move it and decide who can edit, who can create, and where and what. But this is, again, so this content is much more straightforward. This works in a very WordPress style manner, right? I can, modify the text. I can add new items in here, and this list is always growing. It's very early. This list will be much longer. Sorry, now I can't get, now everywhere I click, it's editable, right? So, and then down here, I have what's called a checkpoint, which is, it's a particular kind of quiz. And again, I can set learning objectives for it. I can edit my STEM. I can edit the potential answers. I have an answer key. I can give generic feedback, which is what the authors here decided to do. I can add targeted feedback, where I can give feedback for each particular answer that a student might give. And I can add hints. So if a student says, I just don't know, right? You can add different levels of hint. And all of this is recorded behind the scenes about not only how individual students behave in this, like, are they just clicking through the hints to get to the answer, but also the patterns that tell us what this question can show us about the effectiveness of the question itself and the content. And this dynamic variables, I'll confess, is a tab that's shown up since the last time I've demoed, and this looks like it's for it's an advanced authoring feature that allows users with experience writing JavaScript to create a question that changes on each student attempt. So this is for if you want to write math questions, where it's a template and it's constantly generating new math questions, you can do that.
Sure. So,
and one last,
No, go ahead, sorry.
I was going to move on to one last page, but okay. So this is really important. If you're creating content, and more importantly, if you're editing content or creating content as a non-expert user, but even if you are an expert, we want to make it really easy to get it right. So we built in an accessibility checker, which at this point is just looking for a few things, but we will make it more robust over time. And it shows you exactly where the problem is and lets you click in and change it. This content checker is really checking for internal link integrity, because if you allow people to start editing content and two pieces are linked in ways that are are critical. So you break the content if you remove a page. We want to make sure that that's called out. And the pedagogy checker right now is really looking at, do you have learning objectives? Are those learning objectives attached to assessments? Are all the assessments attached to learning objectives? And so on. This will become richer over time. We have funding to, or I should say Carnegie Mellon has funding to add an equity checker. So it will be looking for representative language and representative images. That's the beginning of machine learning starting to creep into this, right? So where we're going with all of this is increasingly sophisticated use of machine learning to help accelerate this process and make it more valid. We know, for example, that inside textbook publishers today, machine learning algorithms are used to generate learning objectives and assessment questions for content that is written by experts. And then it's checked by experts to validate it. But nobody's using those algorithms to help people out in the world who are creating their own content do the same thing.
Sure. This sounds extremely exciting. So thanks for the tour. I think we've seen quite a bit already. I'd like to take a step back and talk about what I just mentioned a couple of minutes ago about the educational ecosystem of service providers to universities. And correct me if I'm wrong, you're targeting mostly undergraduate and perhaps master's degrees. Are there any other target customers?
Well, today on the platform, we have K-12 learners and
as well.
Post-secondary and various different models. And that's, one of the things about the Argos platform is it's very horizontal in terms of types of learner profile it can support. And therefore, we can serve many different markets. And we've instrumented different business models on top of that. So we have advantages that way. Yeah.
Sure. But the word targeting that you use is important because it is true that we are targeting higher education as publishers and as our primary adopters. But to higher education publishers want to reach K-12 and workplace. So we're in K-12 because one of the groups at Arizona State University that we work with has a NASA grant to develop content for K-12. We didn't make the decision to go and chase K-12 to the market. They did. And that's the way we will continue to work.
And as a startup, it makes sense to pivot even on the side of, call it a pivot or call it like an opportunity presents itself, and therefore, yes, let's go on to this opportunity. We originally built it with one target in mind, but it works fine for another target. Why not work on that target? It totally makes sense.
Exactly, as long as it doesn't distract from achieving the core goals. And in our case, your use of the word ecosystem. I mean, that's exactly our point, which is, we aren't doing anything other than providing this infrastructure, right? And the supports around it. So we can do a lot of things without having to be intentional about it or without having to pick battles, right?
Sure. So talking about these ecosystem of service providers, well, it's quite different when we're talking about K-12, higher ed. In the case of higher ed in Europe, I feel like the scenario that is most common is actually lecturers developing their own material. You can perhaps contribute a bit on how you see the difference between the European scenario and the US scenario. But most of the time, even though universities are starting to hire whole teams of instructional designers and media designers, they're there to support, most of the time, to support lecturers in developing their own material. And to me, this is frankly quite an unbelievable request towards lecturers. I mean, it's a completely different job to teach, to be a lecturer, and on the other side to be an instructional designer, to be a curriculum developer. But this is true in K-12 as well. Being a teacher and being a curriculum developers are technically very different jobs. And of course, there's a lot of interaction between the two, and the more the better. But yet, teachers and lecturers are very often asked to fulfill the roles, different professional roles, the ones I just mentioned. So do you see what you're building, what Michael just showed you, being mostly adopted directly by teachers, as in teachers going in and modifying content? Do you see these learning designer teams that are being hired by institutions being the ones jumping in and modifying? My feeling is that the level of complexity is adaptable, or a teacher can go into a lower level of complexity and do some lower level of complexity adaptations, whereas a learning designer or other professional roles on the IT side perhaps can jump in and have access to higher level adaptations. But this is my feeling during the tour. Would you like to develop upon this?
Yeah, I can tell you where we are, already today. So we've mentioned Arizona State and Carnegie Mellon. We referred to both of those as being publishers in their own right. So what you need to understand about that is Carnegie Mellon's catalog, for example, they've got 45, 50 courses in their catalog. Their current user base, we're not talking about Carnegie Mellon students, right? We're talking about students at 300 other campuses being served by several hundred educators, right? So there's this natural network that's out there already. Similarly with ASU InSpark, smaller number of titles, they're at about 16 or so titles now in their catalog, just under 100 campuses that use it, a couple hundred educators again. But you can see kind of the power of that. And so you have these educators who are then modifying that. One thing we know from research we've done, as well as research friends of ours have done, your typical educator, at least in the North America market, is spending 8 hours a week modifying their course, right? Now they modify it today by stitching things together in the LMS and parking PowerPoints over here and sending the student over to this other online homework system, right? So why not then evolve a platform that helps inform good design and captures all the data so we can learn more about how to drive impact at scale, right? And so that's really where we're going. So to your question though, we have a population of institutions, for profit, not for profit. They're not necessarily education institutions. They could be not for profit agency type organizations that have some kind of mandate around supporting a learner space, a learner market, right? We also know, and we have today, individual educators who either want to craft from whole cloth, brand new product, and they're busy building that today. And then we have, as Michael showed you, we already have educators who are kind of doing well, I'm gonna take the 20% that matters, most to my instructional style and my learners and the milieu of my institution. I'm going to modify that using somebody else's course as the base. And so we have all of that already beginning to happen. We're, to us, that's the really important part of the Argos model, is getting that collaboration and reuse and sharing of not just content, but best practice to begin to up-level all of that. And, you keyed on this thing around the growth of the learning designer, the instructional designer, skill set and the number of them on campuses and that sort of thing. It's interesting when we show Argos to that class of user, their first thought always is, this helps me extend the professional development I'm trying to serve my faculty with. Yeah. Right. So it brings them scale and gives them better impact as well.
Further on the educational ecosystem, suppose we have, and I imagine, well, to some extent this is happening, but it's happening in the world of OERs, I guess. We have a developer that develops the one single tiny a bit of the curriculum in learning experience, suppose e-learning scenario-based experience. And they've developed all the IT and all the learning design behind it and all the gamification behind it. It's one single bit that could cover only a small part of a curriculum, yet so much work went into developing it. Now, the situation as I see it is there's a difficulty in creating a revenue model for these figures to create the small little bit that then can be included inside a university course or a K-12 course. Do you think that Argos or some of your partners' dynamics can unleash this potential of small single freelance creators, or not freelance, even whole companies that create small little bits that then are adopted within another publisher's product that then are put onto the Argos marketplace? I thought about this when you showed me the Colorado University developed experience during the onto Arizona State University published material during the demo you just gave us, Michael.
Yeah, so that's exactly where we're going. We're not there yet, to be clear. We're right now, if you want to do that today, you do that contractually, right?
Yeah.
But we definitely, there are, for example, the easiest way to gain entree into this world is there are companies that sell or license large numbers of videos for use in courses, and they already have pricing model that's set, right? So we just need to enable that kind of e-commerce microtransaction in the platform, and we have mock-ups of this idea already. We've demoed it. We know it plays well. Instructors can understand it. Publishers who are building their courses can understand it. We just have to build out that infrastructure. And I want to get to an important point about publishers, and maybe, is it all right if we talk a little bit about the origin of Argos here? Because I think
sure. I was gonna ask you about the origin anyway. So yes.
Yeah. So because I think that it's easy from this conversation for us for Argos to come across as being anti-traditional publisher or all about OER, and none of that's accurate. Those happen to be areas of opportunity, and they present new models that are pushing us in a new direction. But the truth of the matter is that this idea started about a decade ago at Cengage Learning, where Curtis and I both worked at the time. And we were frustrated. We were seeing needs that our customers were expressing that we were not within the corporate structures allowed to meet, right? Customers wanted to modify the content we were giving them and turn them into a course. They saw the potential of our new platform, MindTap, which at the time was very innovative and had a lot of potential for expansion. They wanted to make some of the modifications that we've showed you in Argos today. They talk about putting their own content in, but very often they weren't necessarily wanting to put all their own content and not use Cengage content at all. There was some of that, but a lot of it was I use 80% of what you offer is perfect for my course. I don't want to have to think about it. It fills my need perfectly. There's 20% that it doesn't address that really is the difference between your textbook and my course.
Yeah.
And I want to add that 20% in.
Yeah.
I want to create a complete learning experience.
Yeah.
we weren't allowed to do that, not because there was any technical barrier, but because it just wasn't the business strategy at the time. And we started seeing that we were building vast amounts of functionality that, frankly, as a publisher, I mean, we managed to pull it off. MindTap was a pretty good product, but publishers in general are not software developers. It's just not in their DNA. It's not what they excel at, right? But yet we were building these complex software platforms, and all our competitors were building the same software platforms, and 95% of the functionality that they were building was the same as ours. And in fact, a good percentage of the functionality that we were building was also the same as in the LMS. A gradebook is a great example of something that's an incredibly complex piece of software that everybody hates, no matter how hard you try to build it well. And the LMS companies have already taken a tremendous amount of time to build gradebooks. And so we wanted to create a platform in which it made sense, where we could talk to smaller publishers who were never going to be able to afford to build a MindTap, and we couldn't do that either. So in our minds, what we built in Argos is, among other things, a new world. I should say, Curtis, we discussed all this in a bar at EDUCAUSE, which is a big conference here in the United States. We were all depressed, and Curtis took notes and pulled them out 10 years later when we were in the midst of working with Carnegie, Mellon, and ASU, and said, this is it. But you know, the point here is that the traditional publishers need this too. The world of technology has pulled them away from their core competence to spend a lot of time and money on building out the same capabilities everyone else is building out and doing a poor job at it. And there's really no reason why their excellence at building content can't be worth something on this platform, and why they can't use this platform to actually build closer relationships with their customers.
My question then is, and you somewhat addressed this, but I think the technology side of building something like what you've shown me that you're building at Argos was probably there already to some extent when you guys had this conversation 10 years ago. Yet it hasn't happened in 10 years. What do you think were the major blocks to it happening? Without me inferring some of these from what you just explained, I'll let you guys respond to this.
Could take a day in itself, right, to unpack the entire industry. But you know, I think there's probably three key pieces. First and foremost is the publisher business model, right? And you have to remember, in the arc of the same period of time, let's just say the last 20 years, right? What's true is textbooks were still the centerpiece of, in many ways, of the education delivery model. LMSs were just beginning, and publishers were taking, you know, what was then CD-ROMs in the back of the book and putting them online, right? And mostly that manifested as homework solutions. In other words, saving the educator time, right? Yeah, making things easier for the student to do things in a certain way, but really was it the job to be done of that product was saving the educator time, right? And what's interesting is that the big publishers today, that product model still dominates their market, right? That is the thing that sells. So one is kind of that pattern. Two, the companies that we follow in many ways, and from a category, or at least the way we often get pigeonholed into categories, they went after this kind of personalized learning or adaptive learning arena. They came at it with just technology, right? And so it was kind of empty. They had no content. And in many cases, they had a very prescriptive model. So to build a course, you have to do it our way, right? Here are the design specs, right? So that's kind of two, is technology for the sake of technology driving driving the outcome.
I'll jump into that one before you go on to the third one. I can think about at least one company that was offering adaptive learning solutions to publishers of all kinds that could then purchase the adaptive learning solution from them and integrate it into their published products. Now, this company has been acquired by one of the major publishers, the major one I'm thinking about. But so I guess that model could have provided what we're looking for, couldn't it?
Well, a couple things there. One, even today, AI and ML has its shortcomings, right? In terms of these kind of what I would characterize as brute force models. So yes, the intention was good, right? But often with these, it's an implementation of AI and ML that is perfect in the mind of somebody, but then very opaque to the actual end user, right? So the company you're talking about, for example, kept saying, "Oh, we're going to be this magical thing. We'll figure it all out. We'll model your content, publisher. We'll make it perfect." But then when it's deployed, the learner the learner's got an experience. The educator has no visibility into actually what's going on inside the black box. Yeah. So the third item, and I'm just picking the kind of the big three out because it's a very nuanced and textured set of issues that have kind of created this rigidity. So, coming off like somebody else's design of an AI model, right? That's opaque doesn't help either. And because nobody's got any visibility into how it works or what impact it's actually having. But the third one is then the broader technology adoption in the industry. And by technology, I mean the whole, the available technology to an educator, right? And, a couple factors relate to that. One is educators have rarely been the decision maker, the choice maker of the technology they use, right? It's usually the institution, often the CIO function, making those decisions like LMSs, right? And so the educators don't have a lot of say in it. Two, well, why go digital at all? Like, why, if I've got to practice, to your point about the lecturers earlier, like if I've got to practice, like it's just more work for me to go digital. What benefits do I get out of it? Mm-hmm. And, I think that's held us up for a long time. And so, that said, I think we're at a point now where, we're broadly seeing this move, a lot of it accelerated by the pandemic, institutions realizing they have to change now. Their learners, whether it's in post-secondary market or the corporate training market, their learners are demanding, more kind of on-demand or digital forward kind of models for consuming their education, right? And so, like a lot of things in life and a lot of different markets, like you've got to adapt to where your consumers, your customers are adapting, and those adaptations are technical. They're choice, right? And sometimes they're regulatory. So those things are all, kind of moving as well.
I'd like to add that the demo that you saw that software was harder to make than it looks. There are in two ways. First, we get a lot of educators and product people alike who've looked at the demo and said, I really like this, but I don't know what it is. And it's not that they couldn't imagine how they would use it. It breaks all their categories. It's not a traditional textbook, because in their mind, a textbook is something that is, whether it's digital or analog, it has a binding on it. It's locked down. It's not this adaptive learning system, because those are complex and we don't know what's in the box and all of that. It's not an LMS, but it has characteristics of all of those in this new and interesting way. And so coming up for the formula, the vision for something that's coherent, that isn't just a mess of features was actually really hard. And then building it, just the permission structure to enable that kind of flexibility in who can do what under which circumstances, which, by the way, we're still actively working on. That alone is incredibly complex. The kind of e-commerce capability that we've been talking about is incredibly complex. It's not complex in the sense that it requires some magical algorithm that's never been invented before, that it's, you know, blockchain in the metaverse. It's complex in the old-fashioned way that it just requires a lot of hard thinking and a lot of hard work.
Yeah. And even more so, I suppose, well, you spoke, how many users do you have at this moment? You spoke about earlier.
Yeah, we're at about 12,000 year to date.
Okay, so learners, right?
But September is going to be a big bump for us, because we went live in January with a subset of courses from ASU, and in the fall we're going to have a full catalog, and 100% of the users migrated from ASU, and we believe we're also going to have a couple of courses from Carnegie Mellon.
Yeah. Right.
We're going to 30,000 enrollments by next month.
What was that? Sorry?
It could be as high as 30,000 enrollments, you know, but in the next quarter.
And this is on the learners side. On the teachers, professionals side?
Probably about 700, somewhere in that ballpark. Yep.
So I suppose many of these are the profile of the early adopter, because they probably have more of a thirst for solutions like that Argos can provide, and are more willing to spend some time to tinker and try out and mess about with the platform and the various options they have to.
Yeah, actually not.
Actually not. Okay.
These are existing customers. Both ASU and Carnegie Mellon are migrating from existing platforms. This is an important bit that we haven't talked about yet. ASU was on a platform called Smart Sparrow. And when I say ASU, of course, I mean the particular groups at ASU we're working with. They're very sensitive about being clear about that, right? So the groups at ASU that we've been working with, they built up these tens of thousands of enrollments at about 100 schools, or working on this platform called Smart Sparrow, which was purchased and discontinued by Pearson. So they needed some place to migrate. Carnegie Mellon, meanwhile, built up its own business using a platform it developed called OLI. And through both of these groups and Argos worked together on an open source project that is the next generation, combining those two platforms where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Okay. And so this is a new platform, but they're not new users. They're not coming to Argos. They are existing customers from these publishers. And in many cases, they didn't come to these publishers necessarily for the tinkering. They came, for example, because they're feeder schools to ASU, and they saw value in using some of the same course content that ASU uses. They're using the Carnegie Mellon statistics course because it's one of the most thoroughly researched courses on that in terms of its efficacy of any courseware out there, and it's just a really darn good statistics course. And if you're going to take a statistics course that was built by a university, Carnegie Mellon's a pretty good one to choose. So there are some tinkerers in this group, and in fact, both of these legacy platforms were less easy to tinker on than Argos is, and both both of these publishers are excited about the prospect of getting their educators more involved in the tinkering.
Yeah, right. Okay, so on one side, there's the positive aspect of having had all kind of users, all kind of user groups already involved in what you're doing at Argos. On the other side, and it might be the hard question coming up here, you haven't really had experience with onboarding new users and the new profiles that have not had exposure to any of what Argos has to offer up until now. Is that correct?
We're in the middle of that, candidly. So, the way we think about our go-to-market is a top-down, bottom-up approach. And as Michael's said a few times, we launched in January. So we're 8 months in. We have a pretty interesting pipeline, including some signed kind of commitment letters from both for-profit and not-profit institutions and different kinds of providers. And their interests are somewhat varied. So some of them think, oh, we're going to build courses for delivery only to our students.
Yeah.
Right. Others think, oh, we have an existing catalog that we want to convert to make them more adaptive using the Argos adaptive model. And then others say we want to do both and we like the marketplace. So we want to take courses that we're using for our learners, but we think they might fit very well, say, in the community college system as an offering, there. So Michael and I and our team and some of our partners are out kind of knocking on doors and talking to these bigger institutions. Many of them, by the way, have the resources to build MOOCs today, right? And so we think there's a natural fit there. They understand the model. We fill the funnel that way. And if we have not mentioned it yet, I want another important point here, which is we flipped the business model, believing that we could actually gain market access more quickly by avoiding an enterprise license. And so we let anybody come on and begin to use Argos for free, right? Whether you're creating something new or whether you're adopting something and making it your own, there's no upfront fee as an educator or a designer to do that. Argos only makes money when that course is used by learners, right? So that's the top down, strategic accounts, think of it that way. And then our marketing, kind of our viral aspect, you could call it product-led marketing, product-led growth marketing. We think it fits very naturally into that educator community. If we're able to use the platform to create communities of educators that have common interests, those interests could be a discipline, could be an approach to teaching, it could be a geographic, it could be something else, that we could begin to tap into those communities of educators. We can get viral very, very quickly. And there are precedents, in other ed tech, there are precedents of companies that have been able to, figure that out and kind of get the messaging going. And that's where having a broad catalog to start is very helpful to us, because we can we think we've got this kind of natural leverage now, especially with the Schmidt Futures work, to say, here's a chemistry product, here's the community of chemistry educators. How can we then, build best practices and community of purpose around extending that? And so, can get very, very powerful, we think.
And do you think for the spread of Argos, the community is going to be a big instrument you might rely on, or what are other components of the spreading strategy?
The communities are by far the most interesting and powerful. And again, there's a little bit of our origin story that says we think to some extent the educators have been left off to the side, right? If you're a company you were referring to earlier that says we're going to be the tutor, right? They're pushing the educator to the side. They're trying to do the educator's job. And a lot of ed tech came in with that premise of, the problem to be solved is that we got to get the educator out of the way because they're the blocker. Well, that's actually not the problem, right? The problem is how do you deploy technology to support and advance educators in positive ways, right? Make them more effective, right? Give them more of their time back to do what they do best, which ultimately is to teach. And so, I think that's a very fundamental principle of what we're what we're building.
I also think it's important to acknowledge the dynamic that was already in place before we started Argos, which was one of the signs that Curtis saw that drew us in, which is, how did Carnegie Mellon reach 300 schools?
Yeah.
They don't have sales or marketing teams, right?
Yeah.
These are natural networks. Every one of these institutions has natural networks, and it's the reason why in the college market, at least, textbooks are not named after the publisher. The primary branding is the professor who wrote them, because that branding is potent, right? As is the brand of the institution that professor comes from, right?
Sure.
So that is a powerful way that will spread. And I think the third thing is just the utility of this. We've been surprised, really surprised, frankly, that we've had a couple of what seem like so far pretty serious conversations with commercial publishers, commercial textbook publishers, about using our platform, because they see the utility of what we have to offer and how it allows them to have community relationships with their own customers, and how it gives them capabilities that they can't afford to build themselves.
Sure. To kind of wrap up, we spoke about so many topics, and I think we got a quite clear picture of what you're building at Argos. I did not ask you to show some of the, perhaps we could briefly show the content library of what's up on Argos right now. Would you like to show a bit of the library?
Do you have that handy, Curtis?
I don't have it up. Give me a second.
So while Curtis is pulling it up, I'll say that because both in Spark at there were actually two groups I'll mention at ASU, in Spark and Infiniscope, and OLI at Carnegie Mellon, have been building their own businesses for quite some time. They have their own websites, and we have enabled e-commerce through those websites to our back end.
Yes.
So they can sell through their store and through ours. Okay. Curtis, go ahead.
Yeah, and if we had, Luigi, depending on how you want to play this, I could also show you the back end where how we support bookstores and other providers that want to do various kinds of delivery. But the Learning Exchange, which is what you asked me to show really quickly, which is now, so this weekend, right, we're putting it out, I should say this past weekend.
Wow, okay.
As an MVP. So this is brand new. You were probably among the first non-Argos people to see it, Luigi, when you were doing diligence on the company. So we're just getting this all kind of sorted out. But what this is we call it the Learning Exchange. It is currently a catalog of collections and offerings that are based on our partners, as we've described. It will become a much more robust market exchange in the sense of we will have 500. So remember the FET.io simulation Michael showed earlier. We will have about 500 of simulations similar to that are both OER and for fee available in the next couple of months, as an example. And so all of that will live in this broader marketplace. But if you want to go in here, you can see which products are available. In Spark being the most robust, we have, you can see we're still trying to get images and other things. So we've got some diversity of images, but we have, in essence, the entire InSpark catalog is represented here. The Hab Worlds is among the most well-known. So this is Ariel Onbar, the PI and educator at Arizona State University, created this. It's really exploring what planets in the universe might support life. and often targeted to non-majors, right? So it's a STEM course for non-majors.
Yeah.
Living on the Edge is all about climate change, for example. So
yeah.
Pretty broad. And then as we bring on Carnegie Mellon's OLI and some others, and certainly the OpenStax catalog, we believe within kind of the next couple of months, we will have roughly 60 to 65% of the first 2 years in terms of US colleges, kind of the first 2 years worth of available curriculum in terms of the kinds of courses that the catalog will support. And then we go from there. The other thing I'll point out is you'll see we have products that are priced and others that are not. And that's just a function of, how they're available, who they're made available to. And it's also very clear that these price points are quite competitive to the more traditional publisher product models. And that's a function of, the economics. If you're a university building courses, what your expected returns are, what kind of staff you're supporting. Yeah. You don't have big sales teams, things like that. So our design goal is we never want to be in a position to say a product should be priced at X. We have opinions about what the right frame is for healthy economics, sustainable economics. But we also believe that Argos can scale much lower prices in the long run. And that's certainly part of our mission orientation as well.
Yeah, thanks for showing us the library.
Yeah.
To wrap up, I wonder whether you wanted to tell us a little bit, briefly, a little more where you're at as a business stage at the moment, whether you've raised funding, how you plan to develop the business. You mentioned nonprofits to partner with. Is that an area that you think you might be obtaining funding from, or are you looking more on the venture capital side, and so on?
Yeah, happy to. So, we've been a venture equity based, kind of model thus far. We raised about $1.5 million on pre-seed. As Michael mentioned, we've also raised time to date $400,000 from Schmidt Futures to support some of our research-oriented work, with a follow-on that grant if we achieve the milestones that we hope to achieve. And we've been seeking a seed round, thinking that that's the best way to scale a business like Argos, right? Is more of a traditional venture-backed model. As you are very well aware, Luigi, the venture market's been very difficult the last few months. And so we're exploring other options as well. You raise an interesting point in your question by mentioning kind of the nonprofit. It's not uncommon, but it is somewhat rare to see a venture-backed company have both equity, VC-backed support as well as nonprofit or impact fund support. And so, it's clear to us that there are many more opportunities for Argos to benefit from, what we might think of as nonprofit or foundation-backed efforts. And in fact, one of the courses being built on Argos right now is backed by just such a thing. It's a big family foundation that's sponsored a several $1 million grant for Carnegie Mellon and ASU in a joint partnership to build a specific product, a specific course product. And so Argos benefits from those things. And that's back to this ecosystem model. We can live in the middle of, whether it's InSpark or somebody else getting, grant funded from a foundation or for the Department of Education, et cetera, to build product. You could see the same thing happening in like a workforce development setting where a regional group, a government or a quasi-government group could do that. So, we're exploring those angles as well. And quite recently, we've actually had a few inquiries about acquiring Argos. Less typical for early stage company to see that sort of thing. But given the market conditions, those that have capital to deploy typically look more like operating commercial entities that are looking to expand their portfolio or find some other leverage point. And they're less risk averse right now and have different calculations for return and things like that. So we're entertaining that. Our view is Michael and I, as you can tell, we didn't just graduate from college. We've been around a couple of years. And, going into this venture as entrepreneurs, first-time founders, right, at the stage of career that we were at was not something we did lightly. It was all about what kind of impact could we have on the sector, very much mission first. And so our goal is, let's make sure Argos survives and that Argos can have the impact it should have on the sector. And it will all have been, very much worth it if we can achieve that.
So if you're watching this and you like what you see and you have money to deploy, we're here.
Exactly.
Are there any other announcements? I was going to ask about announcements. I think you've covered that side, Michael.
Thank you. Yes.
All right.
I think, look, the other announcement, we're really pleased that our friends at ASU were in a tough spot. They were on a platform that was unique. It was being turned off. They managed to buy themselves an extra year through good faith negotiations with Pearson, but it was by no means obvious that the tens of millions of dollars of really valuable courseware that was developed there would survive. I'm happy to announce that 100% of those courses have been migrated, and 100% of those students who would use those courses and the faculty who teach those courses are going to be teaching on them in September. So that's a happy announcement.
Yeah, definitely. That's a big announcement as well. Thanks a lot for being with us today, Curtis and Michael. This was an extremely interesting conversation, and I obviously look forward to seeing your progress at Argos and what's going to happen in September. A lot going on, apparently. I'm sure Argos is offering a quite needed model in the educational ecosystem we spoke about. So I really look forward to see what level of impact you're going to be able to deploy in the educational ecosystem.
Thank you, Luigi.
Thank you
for being with us.